Well, hello there. It has been quite a while since I filmed a video, but I am back, and you might notice this background is a little bit different today, and that's because I am sitting about 2,600 miles from where my last video was filmed. In the past couple of months, I have moved from the mid-Atlantic of the United States all the way to the Pacific Northwest. It has been quite a change. So my husband and I have been trying to get settled in and meet some new people. It was an awesome road trip. It was pretty long, about 5 days in the car. It was really cool seeing the trip all the way across the country and how the terrain changed along the way. We listened to a terrible audiobook we had on CD in the car. We still laugh about it to this day. The writing of it was not very good, and it was just pretty funny. So yeah, I'm not going to really discuss that book today, but I wanted to share with you the books I read in the month of September. The first book I finished in the month of September took me forever to get through, way longer than it should have, but I was just not enjoying this book. I ended up giving this book only 2 out of 5 stars, and that is Feast of Crows by George R.R. Martin. So to me, this book was just so very slow. It took me absolutely forever to get into this book and to get through it as well. To me, this was just kind of like a weird break in books. So if you don't know, this book forward, we stop following the characters chronologically, and it's now broken up geographically. So this book follows all of the characters in kind of the Westeros area and updates you on what is going on with them, and then the next book follows a different group of characters in various other parts of the world in the same timeline that this book takes place, and it's all just very weird. The biggest problem for me with this book was that there were random characters that we had never talked about before, just kind of thrown in, and they had their own chapters following them. I didn't really enjoy that too much because it just was a little confusing for me. This already follows a ton of main characters, and when you add in other characters for just a chapter or two, it gets to be a little bit too much. Unfortunately, some of my favorites were missing from this book, or if they were in it, they had very few chapters. This book almost broke my will. I almost gave up and quit reading this entire series because this book was just dragging. It took me so long to get through it that I almost just decided to quit reading them altogether. But finally, the last few chapters of this book started picking up, and it gives me hope that maybe this next book will be a little bit better. After slogging through the 4th Game of Thrones books, I decided to take a bit of a break up my reading and read something a little bit different. So I ran over to my local library and I picked up a new release that had just come out that I had been really waiting for, so I was super excited to get my hands on it, and that is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. So if you don't know, this is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, also by Margaret Atwood, but this book focuses more on Gilead as a whole. An ant in Gilead, a child who was raised in Gilead, and a child who was raised across the border in Canada, watching Gilead as it unfolded. By far, my favorite chapters in this book, hands down, were the chapters about Aunt Lydia. She was the most compelling character for me. I really liked her storyline, and the backstory that they gave her worked to all of her motives make sense, and I just really enjoyed her thought process and seeing the world of Gilead through her eyes and her actions. I really thought this book could have benefited by having an opposing viewpoint. Someone who is in Gilead, sees and acknowledges its flaws, but still thinks Gilead is a great place to raise a family. I originally thought that book would have this viewpoint with one of the characters, and it ended up changing. I just think it would have made for a really interesting, well-rounded view of Gilead, where you kind of see the people who want Gilead destroyed and the people who are supporting and promoting and trying to grow Gilead. I thought that would have given us a more well-rounded view into Gilead, and I really wish we had that in the book. I didn't really enjoy the epilogue of this book. I see what they were trying to do, and they were trying to kind of mimic how The Handmaid's Tale ended, but unfortunately I didn't think it was as powerful in this book, and I think they maybe could have left it out. My biggest problem with this book is I felt that it was mostly just a fan service to the TV show, which I was really holding out hope that it wouldn't be, and it kind of let me down a little bit. While I really enjoy the TV show, I was hoping this book would be more of a sequel to the original Handmaid's Tale book and tell what happened when that book left off, instead of being more of a sequel to the TV show, in my opinion. After that book, I decided to move on to another book that I had picked up that day at the library, and that was called How to Make Friends in the Dark by Kathleen Glasgow. Unfortunately, I ended up DNFing this book, but it was not because it was a poor book. This book was actually very interesting. It follows a young girl who has just very suddenly and tragically lost her mother, and now has to try to figure out her life without her mother in it. Unfortunately, her mother was the only person she had in her life, so after her death, she finds herself put into a foster care system and is struggling to kind of make sense of the world again. I was really enjoying this book. I thought it was a great book. I thought the author included little details that are true to life in these types of situations. For example, friends that don't know what to say or what to do, they're just overwhelmed by the situation, so they just kind of slowly take a step back from that person's life, and it's really hard for everybody involved in that situation, and I just liked seeing that mentioned in the book because that is true to life. There was also parts where people had a hard time making eye contact with her after she lost her mother, and all of it together is just kind of specific little details that are very important when telling this type of story. This book did have some flaws in the writing, and I think it possibly could have used a little bit more editing. There were some sentences that just weren't constructed very well, and I would have to reread them several times to finally understand what that sentence was trying to say, but that overall was not why I DNF'd this book. I did not finish this book because unfortunately it was bringing up some bad memories and feelings that I had. It was 100% just not good for my mental health at the time, so I had to stop reading it. Occasionally I have dreams where I am reliving the experience of losing my mom over again. I lost my mom when I was a teenager, so this book kind of brought those feelings back to the forefront, and I was starting to experience dreams on a regular basis. I'm just not in the headspace to be able to deal with that at the moment, so I had to stop reading this book, and I immediately returned it to the library. Maybe I'll be able to pick it up in the future. I'm not really sure. I don't know why this book has triggered these dreams the way it did. That typically does not happen with me. I'm usually fine reading these types of books, but for some reason this one was just hitting a little too close for home for me, and I just couldn't finish it. So after returning that book to the library, I desperately wanted something to read, and I was ready to just kind of move on to the next book. So I decided to grab a quick read off of my shelf that I had been wanting to get around to and just never found time for, and that is The Smell of Other People's Houses by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock. I ended up giving this book 4 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy it. I personally think this book had a solid, strong understanding of being human, of loss, of love, of mistakes and regret. It was well written and completely captivating. Now, this book follows multiple main characters and is only about 230 pages long. That is quite a feat if you ask me. But somehow this author made it work. I do wish this book was a little bit longer so we could have had a little bit more time with each of the characters, but with the limited amount of pages, I do think the author did a really great job pulling this all together and having a nice ending at the end where everything was resolved and happy within 230. This was a debut novel. I do not know if this author has written any more books since then, so I will definitely be looking into if she has written any more books, and if she has not, I will be waiting. So I was finally out of a major reading slump that lasted a few months, unfortunately. And with October approaching, I wanted to pick up and return to my favorite genre, thrillers. So I decided to pick up a thriller I had been anxious to read that had been sitting on my shelves, and that is The Girl in 6E by A.R. Torre. The Girl in 6E was recommended by Naya from Naya Reads and Smiles. She had talked about it in one of her videos, and it sounded so interesting that I had to find this book. I eventually ended up buying this book because it is almost impossible to find it in libraries. And when I finally decided to pick this book up, I devoured it. I read the whole book in one sitting, and that is extremely rare for me to do. This book follows the perspective of somebody who has the desire to harm and kill people, but is trying her hardest not to. She does not want to hurt anybody, to the point that she locks herself in her apartment and has not had a face-to-face interaction with an individual in over 3 years. As you can imagine, following a main character who is trying her hardest not to hurt people leaves you in a very tense situation whenever anybody knocks on her door to deliver something, the doorbell rings, or she just decides that she could walk outside at any moment. This was a tense, edge-of-your-seat read, and exactly what I was looking for. So this was actually the first book in a series, and I told myself that I would only buy the first book, read it, and then if I liked the first book, I would go on to find the second and third. So I will be searching my local library to see if they have a copy of the second book. I doubt they do, in which case I will find a way to get my hands on it. Much like Deanna in this book, my hunt is just beginning. So those are the books I read in the month of September. I am excited to not only be filming videos again, but to also be back to reading. I went through a little bit of a hard time there where I didn't want to read. I was so hectic trying to pack everything up and spend my last little bit of time with all of my friends and families that reading and filming were the very last thing on my mind. But suddenly I have a ton of free time. I think it could be the fact that all of my family is on the other side of the country, so I'm hoping for my October to be filled with a ton of spooky and creepy thrillers. If you have any recommendations for those books, please leave them below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to follow me on Instagram, Goodreads, and Twitter. My links are in the description below. I hope to see you guys again soon, and in the meantime, make it a great day. Bye!